For those who were here, some I remember, and for those who weren't, just to describe what I attempted to do in the last two talks. And the first one was to address the nature of science. And I brought a number of illustrations of that, a little sort of potted history of science, illustrating how, at a certain point, this liberation of the thinking from the traditional religious and philosophical history of how things are was transformed by this new idea of experiment, and how with the new ideas that were, how they needed to be held firmly somehow to withstand the impact against the old philosophies. And that firm rock was to measure. Because in measurement you had something like, you measure it, be free of my authority. The authority is in the measurement somehow. And it was a very important step. But then I illustrated also with these little party game pictures how the same measurements could turn out to be a duck or a rabbit. And for those of you who weren't here, that may sound crazy, but those who were, you pick it up. These double pictures where you have a drawing and you can see it one way and then you see it the other way. And you realize then that the capacity of seeing the facts, that really there really aren't any facts, in a sense. There's always somebody with a consciousness actively penetrating and relating to what are called facts. So you can't leave that person out. And for a long time science has adopted the white coat and said, I am not here, here are the results, you go now and, that's what's true now, over there. Somehow leaving out the process. And when you look at the process and you realize that it's an inner process of creating pictures, science itself can say nothing. It's people who work in science, scientists if you like, who are engaged in developing pictures. And then I illustrated that one of these pictures, in the nature of light, there are two alternative versions, a wave theory of light and the particle theory of light, and how these two are held quite happily. Well, happily, I'm not sure about happily, but it's very good for the scientific community to work with two models at once, irreconcilable, incompatible, but both entirely justifiable pictures of the nature of light. Now, if we had the same for Darwin, and we had the same for Big Bang, and we had the same for other theories, then there'd be a kind of possibility of seeing the necessity of moving on with new pictures, as the history of science has shown. And then when you're faced with them both at once, then you have to acknowledge the reality of the human consciousness being present to create a theory. And where does this human consciousness draw on its fountain of support for a theory, its images? It draws, of course, on the imagination. And there we embarked in the second talk on how the cultivation of imagination is the groundwork of science, how the cultivation of imitation, because imitation is a deep entering into something. In fact, children are so entered in, their task is to exit slowly, because they're so far in there. Everything moves, lives, breathes, is. And the power of imitation we have successfully lost as adults. We can regain it, and some people are good mimics, and other people are good actors, and they can find the gesture which will just, and teenagers are very good at finding the gesture which will take you off. Take you up, show you up, whatever, all those phrases. That power of being enter into the other and create it is, if you like, on the social level, it's empathy. On the scientific level, it's entering the phenomena. And if you enter quickly and have a snap quick judgment of something, it's like in life. If you quickly judge somebody as being bad-tempered because they happen to have bushy eyebrows, or they're sweet and charming because they have lovely fair hair, you quickly find out that's the jumping. It's too quick to take an impression like that. But the nature of a science which is resting on numbers and on measurement, it doesn't really have to inquire that side of it. You can brainstorm ideas. How does this work? How does that work? You just can brainstorm the ideas and then see if your measurements will fit. And very quickly, though, the whole pattern of measurement has broken down. And this connection that in the kindergarten young children have, where the world is one, needs to be carried. That's the reality, they carry it. And it's a great sadness when one, and modern life tends to, want to show them that everything is made up of little bits, so many details. Thrust them into the details and tear that oneness into many parts very quickly. And then later, of course, as teenagers, you're then enthusing to them about the way in which the whole web of life is a tapestry and it's all one great wholeness, really. And you think to yourself, now hold on, they knew that actually once. And if I snatch it away by insisting on interpreting the world into little bits, then I've really broken down something that they carried quite naturally as a way of perceiving the world. And they will grow out of that, and they will start to separate themselves off in a very natural and organic way. And the curriculum in a Steiner school feeds and nourishes the process and the stage they're in. And as they move out of one particular stage, then a new nourishment comes in to match that particular distance. And I illustrated that by looking at the way in which the kindergarten moves on into the stories of the kindergarten, move on to the stories of class 1, 2 and 3, and how those stories, since we're linking with science and nature, are really stories about the separating out from nature. You know, my guinea pig talks to me, is fine at one age. And the stories where birds speak to one another, there's a whole sense of relationship in the living world which is magical, but then they drop out of that magic. And there's a point where your child does drop out of the magic. And when they drop out of the magic, then the change comes with a study of the animal world in class 4, a study of the animal world. But that study of the animal world takes on a big picture of the nature of the human being, that somehow the old, perhaps the translations of the Bible have been quite responsible really for our relationship to ecology and the environment, because Adam was given dominion over the plants and the animals. And that word dominion, yeah, one suspects the translation, certainly I've heard the translation of stewardship is closer. And this whole sense, which was very much caught up, not just blaming the church as it were, but it was all caught up in the ramifications of Constantine and the church and the Roman Catholic sort of power model of Roman control, and all of that imposed itself along with the rise of capitalism to produce the exploitation and the manipulation of the world. And the manipulation came about also with this sense of knowing something as science. You're not involved, you can measure it, you can do things to it because you're not really involved in your looking. So all of that separating means a manipulation. So we've had a huge manipulation and a sense of power over the environment around us. And so as the children move in their growing and separating out, one's accompanying that movement by bringing not a category analysis of the animal world, not these are mammals, these are reptiles, but somehow the character of the creature can still be preserved. The character in the sense that the eagle which flies high and perceives from a great height, there you have something that we can identify with actually in our own consciousness. We know what it's like to sort of look down on something and survey it and have a keen eye for something. Or we know also what it's like to be in the experience of the cow, particularly after a rather large meal. But at any time we know we can go down into a very comfortable state of consciousness, the same dream consciousness as the cow or the bull. We have bull in us, we have eagle in us, we have the strength and the symbol of the lion. The lion itself as a creature is not so terribly noble and not so terribly brave, actually, sort of ecologically. But nevertheless, that's not quite the point. There's the accuracy of knowing the creatures in their environment, not making up sentimental stories about them, but capturing some of their qualities and seeing that in capturing those qualities, in drawing them, in writing poetry about them, in painting them, then you're capturing the feeling life, which is the heart of childhood, the class 4, class 5. you capturing the feeling life, and then the feeling life and the picturing, the imagination becomes then moving into the knowledge about the creatures, which they really would like to have real knowledge about the living world. But you're not doing it by categories and lists, or these botanical books that will help you to identify this, that, or the other plant, because the act of identification is actually immediate. If you get to know a tree of a particular kind, it'll become a friend. And that aspect of the botanical world, it's a very quiet and beautiful world. It fits very beautifully the pre-adolescent age of class 5, where there's still this rhythmical, flowing physicality, which comes so beautifully in the Olympic Games, of course, which comes also in that period. So all these things link together in the curriculum and affirm where the children are. And in the science, the affirmation comes through the plant world. Beautiful to draw, extraordinary diversity and flow of form and shape, wealth of form and shape, and then a kind of hidden sexuality, if you like, that's there, just touching there in the blossom, in the final glory of a plant. The blossoming has this latent quality of sexuality, which in a way almost mirrors the latent sort of sexuality of that age, where they have matured, at least the girls have, to that kind of awakefulness. Our media, of course, and all our modern life pours in to try and stimulate the most out of that, extract the most out of that, financially or in any other way. But the reality is that touch is there, and the plant world, the study of the plant world, is a wonderful meeting of that particular mood of that age of development. And what I wanted to do this evening was to draw that thread on into class 7 and 8 and into the upper school. Amazing. And in a way, everything we're used to becomes amazing, extraordinary, puts you right back. The more you just look at it, the less you try and make up things around it, the more you just observe it, the more extraordinary it becomes. And it's a bit like that occasion when you go on holiday and you come back to your house, and end of a couple of weeks you look at it and you walk around, you know that feeling where it's all just sort of fresh and just a bit, wow, this is where we live. Yes, everything's fresh, you know. And then gradually, of course, the lawn needs mowing. And then the fatal thing to do is to open the post and don't dare answer the telephone. If you just try and hold that back a little while, it's very good. It's harder as an adult. The children will carry it a bit longer. But you have that moment where everything's fresh and new. And you just imagine to yourself, how would it be if every day I woke up with a feeling my whole life is fresh, everything is new. Where am I now? Oh yes, I'm here, and there's that, and there's that, and there's that. The whole sort of fresh, here I am sort of feeling, which on good days I can get close to, actually. But it is that freshening of something that when we do go away and come back, we have that experience of freshness. And so we switch on the light, and the light comes on, and we go, oh, hold on a minute, you know, that light, that electricity, you know, don't know anything about it at all. So there in class 6 last time, I said how you had the animal, class 4, plant, class 5. You can see the trend is going down. Class 6, they really do turn a corner in class 6, and they're really not nice little boys and girls anymore. They've just got a little bit of edge to the way they look at you in class 6. Some class teachers find that quite daunting. It's just a practice, really, for later. That there is a certain shift there of consciousness. They're now scrutinizing, it's very true, you know, and they want to do it themselves. They want to find out themselves. And you've got then geology. They come down to the mineral, you see. Just so right that they do geology. It's rocks, stuff you can pick up, stuff you can break up, stuff you can draw, you can cut, you can do stuff. And with that also looking at the physics of things. And that's where we got to the magnets last time, and physics of heat and light and sound and all these things. It's just a light touch with each one. A few days with sound, a few days with light, a few days with heat, mechanics, whatever it may be. Just a few days on each. You might have a couple of blocks of 3 weeks, perhaps with the physics, and they can observe things and want to make things with the physics then. And then in class 7, there's the beginning where their thinking's awakening, and they want to think about how the things relate to one another and what the laws are. And then what was just looking at electric phenomena becomes wanting to know the law of how the electricity works. So whether in class 6 you're saying that the aurora borealis, the hugeness of that, is a magnetic electrical effect. Lightning, thunder, lightning. In class 7, you're bringing the electrical and the magnetic phenomena down more into a sort of jam jar. You see, you're bringing it down into becomes much more than experiments that you might expect to see in a science class in any situation. And that's why people say, well, science begins in class 6 or class 7. And that's always sad to say that, because I hope I've illustrated that it's a rolling thing, but the visible experiment with a jam jar, you might see, is there in class 7. And there you can show how the magnetism and electricity weave together. And with class 8, you can show then how the law can actually come out to practical effects in the motor, for instance. So you're leading down into a touch with technology in class 8. And the themes of class 7 and class 8 are to bring them the phenomenon and to start them on the task of thinking about them. But you're not intending to give them theories about how it is. You're not going to introduce electrons or any kind of abstract, whatever they are. You're trying to work from what they actually experience. So for instance, in mechanics, you show the principles of the seesaw on a big scale with a plank and your old bang in the car park. And they know what a seesaw is like, and they've ridden on a seesaw and they know all about that. But the exact measurement of the distances from one end to the fulcrum in the middle will depend on how heavy they are as to whether they balance or not. So they can find this law about you're twice as heavy, you have to go half the distance to the fulcrum. And then you could lift somebody who's a different weight. You can measure the distance, you can measure the weight. And you can see there's a wonderful law that tells you when you can get the seesaw balanced. So they're coming into their thinking of the law, the measuring of the law, and at the same time you're trying to link up whatever you're doing with the human being and with the world of practical things. So for instance, when you've done the seesaw, which is one set of levers, then there's the one where you go and you take a spade and you dig it in the ground and you lean on the handle and you push down. That's a slightly different sort of leverage, because the fulcrum's in a different position. Another one is the fishing rod. Got the fishing rod. On the end is quite a big weight of a fish, and here you're controlling it, and the fulcrum is resting in your thumb here, or on the stand here. So where something is pushing, and where something is lifting, and where it's turning about the fulcrum, that changes. That's the seesaw, it's in the middle. Then there's one set of lever where it's up one end, and then there's another kind of lever where it's up the other end. You've got three things. Very quick sort of summary of it. But you can apply that to the human body. So when you study the skeleton, which is really, they do come down to levers, the bones are levers. You can really address the bones as a mechanical aspect of the human being. That is the seesaw. That is the wheelbarrow. That's the wheelbarrow. You're lifting the back up. Back of the heel goes up, and you're lifting onto your toes. It's not when you're wheeling the wheelbarrow along, so just when you go and you pick it up, not wheeling along, just when you pick it up. So you lift yourself up and you wheel up. So you've got the wheelbarrow. Seesaw, nodding off in main lesson, or any time it goes forward. Seesaw, back and forth. There's a seesaw. The fishing rod. This is the amazing thing about the limb. We have this capacity to move our arms at a tremendous distance and movement of speed, like the hands of a clock. So the levers, you can apply them to the whole of the body. And the body is very much something they're getting used to being longer and newer. So to become conscious of the body with the study of mechanics is also to be conscious of, and they're bumping into things at this age. They're growing out of their clothes, and they're actually they're getting quite clumsy. Class 8, class 9, they get quite clumsy. So you've got the attention of whatever you're bringing, you're applying it to the world, you're seeing how it lives and how it works within the human body. Nutrition, the study of the substances that enter the body, the last chance perhaps to give them a clue as to what a balanced diet is all about before they really have their own ideas, and McDonald's calls against many of your own forces of adolescence against that gets harder and harder. There's the opportunity then for, if you like, a whole realm of health and hygiene and caring for themselves. There's this moment of real independence and responsibility for their own welfare that comes through study of disease and of nourishment. With that and the chemistry comes the burning of substances and the study of the chemistry of food substances. All of that weaves together as a whole. So at the end of the class teacher period, they've been introduced to all the different realms of what we call science, all with a touch that gives them experiences and phenomena and carries it through so they think about the things in relationship to themselves and in relationship to the world. So there's always this sense of whatever you know has implications for yourself, has implications for the world. It's never a kind of abstract study where you're somehow manipulating substance to sort of find out what's there almost isolated from any other aspect. So everything that you're looking at, you're relating socially, practically, environmentally, and in terms of health-wise, and to the human body. That's a kind of sweep through class 7 and class 8. Now, one of the core sort of paradigms, ideas, working ideas of science in our time is that the human being is an animal. It's somehow seen to have somehow been proved. It's spoken of as if it is just a fact. That the body somehow can be understood as a miraculous, extraordinarily beautifully developed machine. But essentially that everything about the body can actually be worked out in tiny little, you get down to very small little mechanisms, as they're called. Always the talk is of mechanisms for this and mechanisms for that, mechanisms for that. So we live in a very mechanistic, materialistic age, and science does and has until recently, until very recently, it's changing, until recently, embodied this materialism. And I think when teenagers now are looking, who am I? The answer comes back, you're an animal. And then they're looking for, well, what is this body that's doing all peculiar things now? Hormones are flowing and I've got to deal with this body that I have and it's all happening and all the potential for whatever is there. And what is it? It's a machine. It's an incredible machine. Everything is sort of linked to everything else. It's all buzzing with hormones. And in fact, a biology book I recently looked at said, when you reach puberty, your hormones switch you on. Now that's an extraordinary statement. And then, amazingly, when the study of the brain comes, there's a little airplane cockpit. And inside the airplane cockpit, this is to illustrate the brain controlling the body, inside the skull next to it is the little airplane cockpit. But what's intriguing, you see, is in the airplane cockpit, there's no pilot. Because if there was a pilot there, then inside his brain there'd have to be another little cockpit, which is a bit tricky. And then, of course, if there was another little cockpit, there'd have to be another little brain, and inside that brain there had to be another little cockpit, and the ridiculousness of the situation would have been revealed completely. But somehow it looked really good. This brain with an empty cockpit in somehow showed there's nobody at home, which is often perhaps how teenagers feel, but it isn't helpful to teach them that there isn't anybody at home, or that there doesn't have to be anybody at home. It's not the kind of moral or philosophical explanation of life that's going to help them. Whether you believe it's true or not is almost irrelevant. It's not going to help them move through this period of uncertainty. And that's one of the saddest things, I think. And then the animal one is also sad, in that somehow Darwinism tells you in fact, that evolution has arisen through chance, and it's arisen through the accumulation of changes which just sort of happen, and the result is here we are, out of a conglomeration of higher animals. And that whole aspect of chance and the whole aspect of ourselves being animal is very interesting. When you go to Darwin himself, he doesn't speak that. In fact, his book, Descent of Man, was recently analysed by somebody who had it on computer. And they did a word search. And they looked up survival of the fittest, which is meant to be the axiom of authority, Darwinism, things surviving. And it got a mention of 2 in the whole book. Twice this phrase came in the whole book. And then when you punch in to your word search, love, that came up 56 times in Darwin's own book. And when you read what he says about the nature of the human being, he had a vision and a picture of in fact, he explicitly says that this whole process did not give rise to the human being, that the human being's faculty, as I think he called it, the whole faculty, his moral faculty, informed his own development. And in fact, only recently, now, scientific observation of neurophysiology is beginning to see that what we actually do with ourselves in our lives, what actions we perform, and what we embark on to give ourselves, when we're children, neural stimulation actually contributes to the growth of the nervous system. That the brain is actually grows under the influence of crawling, for instance. The influence of physical activity in children actually grows the physiology of the brain. So there's a whole question of how the physiology of the brain grows under the impact of the activities of a child. Now, for Darwin, it was clear that the higher faculties possessed by the human being really inform and form part of the development of the human being. And that's incredibly just completely left out. So Darwin is being used as well in a way that I hadn't realized till recently how much there was in Darwin's writing that just did not match what is put out about Darwinism in this bicentenary year. Now, addressing that for adolescents, the subliminal nature of that is very powerful, and you can teach chemistry without having to mention atoms at all. You can teach chemistry from the phenomenon of the substances, the way the substances interact, the dynamics and the polarities between them, and acid and base, and leading them to the stage where in class 10 they should start now to have a manipulative mind. It's the kind of age where the manipulation, which has been natural, if you like, for humanity from the scientific revolution, and has come very strongly to manipulate matter, now it comes actually quite naturally in class 10. It's important for them to measure something, to compare it, to contrast, to analyze it. Their thinking has come to the point where they can use it like a tool. Before then, their thinking is really at the mercy of whatever's being thought amongst them and around them, and by the adult world and by the media. Their thinking is they just take it on board and they just go with it like swimming in a stream. Very few of them can sort of think independently of what the crowd are saying. And there's this wonderful moment in class 9, or, well, class 10, so in class 9, if you face a controversy with class 9, they'll all be either against you, or they'll be divided, where all of them are all against all of them. And there's a big sort of, it's either black or it's white in class 9. And black or white, the polarities of black or white can be met in teaching physics. There's warmth and there's cold. Cold is very, very powerful, dangerous, real cold. Just as heat is dangerous, real heat. And it's good if they're doing metal work and they discover, or glass work in the laboratory. A piece of hot glass doesn't look hot. You know, you have to be wary of a piece of hot glass. It doesn't look hot. Beating out red hot metal. Real danger. Good. Boundaries of meeting, real danger. But the power of heat, the power of cold, the power of steam. And then the steam is condensed and cooled. It has the possibility of expanding and driving a piston, being cooled, contracting. And the piston can actually work with steam. Or the jet engine, eventually, whatever. You have the possibility of power of heat and expansion and cooling and contraction. And then, what is cold boredom? Go on, make me, you know, interest me. That's the cold adolescent. The other adolescent is, yeah, make me, I refuse. That's the heat of adolescence. So you've got the hot and the cold, and you're just longing for the boredom to change. Or you're longing for the frustration of all that to change. Somehow they've got to harness those two. When they do, they've got a piston. They can put their energies and ideas to useful function. They can get the idea of cycling from John O'Groats to Land's End, as one of class 10 are doing this summer. Cycling from John O'Groats to Land's End, just off their own bat, just their own idea. Quite something. Harnessing their will. So that it's not the heat of enthusiasm, let's go to, you know, John O'Groats, or, I don't want to go to John O'Groats. You know. Between the two is let's harness these things, make a plan, let's do it. So harnessing the hot and the cold in physics, although you don't say anything, you're actually addressing their inner problem, their inner state. Because in a way, the thinking that comes in class 9 has got this chaotic sort of polarity of movement. And in class 10 when you have a discussion, you get the movement where suddenly it's not just one black or white, suddenly you get a new shade of opinion come. They're breaking up into little groups. It happens socially too. There are then smaller groups. They're not the sort of gang mass of class 9, as it were, anymore. They're breaking up into individual sections and individual personalities too. And they're able to stand and say, hey, wait a minute, this could be done because he said we could do this if there was that. Oh. There's a kind of negotiating quality going on in whatever it might be, the rule about this or the rule about the other. There's a negotiation that's possible there. They're coming into looking at something from another point of view. They're able to stand over here and say, well, okay, from that point of view I can see that. And from over here, from this point of view, yes, okay, I can see that. And then much of the curriculum and then the science is designed to try and look at it from one point of view or another. So when you're introducing studies which measure the effect of this on the plant or measure the effect of that on the plant, or they look at the plant in this environment or that environment, how does it grow there? How does it grow there? Is there more shade? There's more sun, there's more water, there's different soil. You're starting to look at that place from the point of view of that plant, and you're looking over here, you're using your thinking to be able to describe different environments, say, to take an example environmentally. Now that capacity to do that in a living way really starts to come in class 10. Until then, they can only sort of tick the boxes, really. They'll do it in class 9, or in class 8, they'll tick all the boxes. Does the plant have this much water, or does it have that much sun? And they'll tick the boxes. But in class 10, they have the beginnings of the capacity to look at something from its own point of view. Because the children here leave at the end of class 10, I don't know how the teachers are handling this aspect, but I'm teaching embryology to class 10 at the moment. And what I'm going to try and do this week is to bring Darwinism and the nature of evolution so that the aspects that I've already outlined can be spoken out loud, and can be shared and can be discussed. I'm not doing chemistry, so I'm not sure in the world of atoms, which they're going to meet when they go into their next, and have already met, if you like, in their exam work. The history of how that idea came about is enormously important for have a perspective on it. The history of the dilemma also of the use of those atomic forces, which was already present in our lesson today with Radek, of the outcome and the human and social implications of using these hidden forces. To know that if you think of matter as little bits to be broken up, you meet forces greater than you can possibly control. And there are kind of hidden forces and energies that if you approach something in a certain way, the result will turn out with some consequence. And the history of ideas, if you like, comes to very practical realization in the atomic bomb, or, if you like, in in vitro fertilization or genetic engineering. All of those are the outcome of ideas. And the struggle, I think, in an upper school, in any of the Steiner upper schools, where the exam work comes in with the ideas confirmed. These are the atoms, this is how you do it, and this is what you learn. These are the genes, this is how they work, this is how they do. And one's trying to, alongside that, bring, if you like, the history of how these ideas arose, and to engage the faculties of the children so that their own faculties are engaged in studying what ultimately then is the study of the genetic theory. And one just knows, I hope I've made it clear enough, that all this background work through the lower classes allows them to retain that imaginative, to own, to be empowered with an imaginative faculty which they know is real and they know they can use. And today when we were talking in the class 10, just thinking there were a couple of really fine contributions, because I'd asked them, we were talking about the development of the young child, and I'd actually got to the point of saying, you know, how remembering the first memory you have, and then remembering games you used to play, and I illustrated by telling them about mine. I think I had a bit of a job thinking of me as a 5-year-old, but I thought it would help. And it sort of took them aback a bit, I think, but it seemed all right, perhaps. And this engagement with the imagination and the faculty of creating a world, I then asked them, well, you've lived through a time when you could read the Harry Potter book, and then you could see the film. And then you could read the next book, and then you could see the film. And then you could read the next book, and then you could see the film. And that's great, but as the films pile up, the children coming after you, they can go and see the film. And then maybe read the book, and they go and see the film, maybe this again. How is it for you, I said, when you read a book and then you see the film, or you see the film, what's it like? They were quite clear that if they'd seen the film, then reading the book was a real trial. I mean, really difficult. And one of them said, well, it's really difficult, I have done it, but the images of the film kept on coming up when I was reading the book. I couldn't, it was a real difficulty. It was really, really amazing that they could absolutely express that and be quite clear about it. And I then went on to speak, and I suppose I take a liberty here, but this is the hidden agenda of a Waldorf school. You know, that I have a bias and I acknowledge it, and I'm confessing it to you and illustrating it with 3 talks. And I do think you're not, this is the thing, the idea somehow that a school or any school or any way of speaking about something is somehow neutral, that you can speak objectively and scientifically. You're not involved. This is the old pattern of science that says, you know, there's objectivity. The only objectivity there really is when you confess your hidden agenda and you articulate your hidden agenda. Then you're free. You have the hidden agenda, which I've tried to express as best I can. And so I feel perfectly comfortable in expressing this to the class as I did today. And I likened it, I said there was a time, 50 or 60 years ago, when the soil was realized that the chemicals in the soil that grew the plants could be enhanced by adding chemicals to them. The idea the plant could get bigger by adding phosphorus and nitrate. The chemists had discovered the importance of phosphorus and nitrate, and so ships arrived with this from Chile and poured it onto the ground, and it was fantastic, and the plants really grew. But then suddenly, across the whole of North America, the soil turned to dust, and the wind came and just blew the topsoil away, and there was barrenness. And now we're learning that it's not just the chemicals, but there's the whole life of the soil, the whole composting of the soil, the whole way in which the soil has a structure, a crumb structure, as the examination teaches. Yes, to know the crumb structure of the soil is an important part of the examination curriculum, and quite right too. Now, I likened it, and I said, you know, in a way, our inner life, and it sort of came to me to say this, I haven't thought about it more, and I've been thinking about it much more since. Our inner life is like a little rainforest or ecological environment, and we have a soil out of which our ideas grow, and out of which our images grow. And if we actually sort of dose that soil, and we dose the images in it with lots of something, we could easily turn that soil to dust, and it could blow away. And I said, I'm really concerned about young children nowadays who receive, right down the age of 2 and 3 and 4, getting flooded with all these images. And they were very quiet, and they listened. And we didn't enter into a discussion. I said, look, if something I'm saying, you don't feel comfortable with, you don't just say it, speak, a different idea altogether. Maybe think I'm talking complete nonsense. That's, absolutely fine. That's what we're here for, to share and find it. Now, it might be, of course, I make a mistake in the sort of lethargy of class 10 after a long period of examinations and then the summer coming, and they've only got 5 more days and they're rid of me and they're off to Sweden. And it could be that. But somewhere in me, because of these, I won't do the other contributions, but that particular contribution was a very fine one, I'm sure you'll acknowledge. And there were 2 other contributions which made me go, I said, that's spot on. I feel that's really true, what you just said. There were 2 others. But I felt there were some of them who were really thinking seriously about what we were speaking about. So, if you like, there's the quality of a main lesson. I'll just try to quickly illustrate things that can happen in a main lesson. I won't tell you the other things too, that they're may not be quite so laudable. But there was just that moment when this arose, this conversation and these contributions. And for me, there's a in the teenage years of teaching anything, but I've spoken about science, where there's an opportunity. And that opportunity is a little window that opens where you can say something that allows them to think a bit deeper, to think wider, to make connections. And that's it. And I have to say, looking back on my school life in the teenage years, I remember one significant moment where there was this very tall, 6'6", rather gangly teacher. Who I didn't know one end of a poem from another. I'd never read a poem, never written a poem, nothing. I was 17 and I'm doing science, And we were given this, obviously they thought they'd better try and redeem us in some way. So we had this 6-week or something poetry course, and this man, he had one ear sticking out this way and the other ear that way, and people always said in a high wind they were sure he would spin round. We had all these terrible jokes about him, and I was just sitting there sort of dreaming away, as I tended to do, and he was reading from Keats, and I can see him now so clearly. Keats, and he was reading Ode to a Grecian Urn, something like that, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple stained mouth. Wonderful stuff, he said. And I sort of went, wonderful stuff. What? It's kind of... And all I experienced from him was his passion, his intensity, and somehow what he was reading, and I couldn't remember what it was somehow deeply meaningful to him. So this one man, just in a brief moment, must have been 10 seconds in a whole period of 4 years, Really, that's all it was. And it is important. And that's what education is about. It's this moment of illumination in 10 seconds. It served me, and at the time I didn't even know, but later it went in, and later it woke up. Extraordinary, really, what education is all about. So there's a little contrast of the difficulty, the examinations which need to be taken, and then there's this thread of the main lesson where one's working with the processes of adolescence, looking for the way in which one can present the wider picture, make connections, and then something, certain things can happen. And other times it's not like that at all. When you feel, what am I doing with, I could, kinds of feelings about teenagers, don't you? And yeah, so that's, I've rather strayed away from science itself, but I was really trying to tackle Darwin, I was trying to tackle atomic theory and the mechanism of the body, because you can teach the human body and the organs of the body through relationships. The relationships of the organs with one another. There don't have to be any mechanisms. The relationships of the organs with one another. Everything can be taught through that. There's no need for the eye to have mechanisms, or any of the organs to have mechanisms. They're just unnecessary as explanations. The hidden agenda of that is not necessary. The other hidden agenda is that we live within a body, and our consciousness as human beings is that we are self-aware. And that self-awareness, there is joy, there is pain, there is suffering, there is pleasure. We witness our own lives by being in a body which is so balanced that we're not thrown utterly into animal instincts. We're just not thrown. We can go there. And human history shows we can go there. But the body has a balance, and the very architecture of the body can show that balance. The architecture of the body reveals something really quite extraordinary, just by the simple observation of that the skull is round. Couldn't be simpler than that, could you, as a description of form, shape. That the limbs are long, and they're down the bottom. There are some arms up the top as well. They're down the bottom. Between the neck, which is a natural division, not complete division, of course, after the French Revolution anyway, just from there to the diaphragm, which is a muscle that goes right across the body. Again, doesn't divide, but it's a good boundary. Between those two, you have the breathing, the heart and the lungs breathing. So you have with the head stillness. You have with the limbs, tremendous movement. And in between, you have movement and stillness. You have stillness and movement. You have the two in balance between the two. And they are between the two, between head and tail. If you think that's, well, okay, that's, a little metaphor. If you start looking, it gets quite serious. Because if you look at the head, what moves? The bottom is the legs. I'm speaking to you with my legs. And at the top, the dome-ish part, the headish part, is at the top, very much the dome at the top. Without any hair, it's even easier to see. The dome of the top. And between the two, the breathing. Between the two. Astonishing. And then if you take a limb, like the femur here, the top of the femur, what's that look like? It's got a little, the hip replacement. The hip replacement has a little ball and socket. What's that top called? Biologically, if you look up in the book, what's it called? It's called the head of the femur. The head of the femur. Fascinating. And then down the bottom of the femur, it fits with the knees, and you have two little things that sit on the knee joint. Just little touch of leg there, And when you think, hold on a minute, this is getting scary. And you go through the body and you realize that there is a free dynamic of opposites and middle going on. You go on through the body, you find these. And then the other thing is you find that there's an emphasis going outwards towards the world, taking things in, and then there's this inwardness. Well, we know the inwardness of the brain, and we know the senses pour into us, but also food pours into us. So food pours into us, and then inwardly, it's all metabolism and power. So you've got the inward and the outward. And they're very extreme in the limbs. Food goes in, boom, and energy goes out, boom, through the limbs. Head streaming in, all this information, sense impressions pouring in, and then we sort of digest them, and we have this inward digestive process called sleep. And then we have things that are nurtured from within, very secret, inward things. And with the heart and lungs, well, there we are, very much more balanced. One just tilts slightly out, and we breathe, and the other is just tilted slightly in. It's the blood circulation. One's definitely in, because if you cut yourself, then that's a disaster. You don't want that to be out. Definitely you see the tilt is out and in. So you've got polarities there working. So within the three, you've got polarities. And then all those are very much in balance. And if you go into the animal world, you find immediately that the imbalance comes, the limbs go out, or the chest is part, or the head, or the senses, or one or other. All of these are in some way developed to an exquisitely wise connection with the world. But when you look at the human form, you find in this frame that we sit, we carry an awareness, an animal awareness of being awake, but we're aware of being awake. Our humanity begins when we become aware of ourselves. And that's the quality of now discussion programs on, about humans and animals and consciousness and so on. I think there's very little said about self-consciousness, because self-consciousness is completely different from consciousness. Self-consciousness is like a caterpillar to a butterfly. Self-consciousness is a completely different entity. And so the hidden agenda, I suppose, then, of the biology teaching is that while you're speaking about the organs of the body, you're wanting to show their relationships with one another are not arbitrary, but they form a dynamic system of extremes and polarities and balances, all of which in the human form are held in a certain degree of check. Held back so much, in fact, that our hands are held right back. They don't touch the ground. They don't go there. They're actually held back. So sometimes the picture of the human being as most developed will actually be better expressed as the human being is least developed. And often conventional biology books remark on how the human being is actually an adult embryo, really closest to the embryonic form. And if you look at the embryo forms, you find that in the animal world, the embryo forms look very, very similar to the human form, and then they go off into their speciality, this way or that way, the other way. And the human embryo just carries on developing without going one way or the other. The whole question of the balance of our organs, which maintains the consciousness and allows self-consciousness to fall in. Unless our bodies are so torn by some genetic defect or some environmental defect, and we cannot get in. And then one's said to be, handicapped or special needs or whatever it is, somehow that can't enter fully and be expressed. And so that hidden agenda, if you like, of the nature of the human being, which lies within what one calls anthroposophy, and it's not a belief, it's a kind of research program. And I've tried to give a little flavour of that research in what I've said. It's a research program to determine with consciousness the powers and forces which allow us that self-awareness. And that lies, I suppose, a hidden aspect of the agenda in biology with teenagers. And although you're not speaking about it, and I'm not telling them about this, I'm not saying what I'm saying here now to them, nevertheless, if that lives in me as a kind of research program, questions that come or things I say somehow are coloured by that research program that I am interested in. Not as a belief, but as an active, conscious research. And that, I sense from my own experience of school, like this illustration I have, that produces a kind of flavour which is more nourishment to adolescence than the flavour which says, you are an animal, your body's a machine, and there's a cockpit without a pilot in there. So that's the hidden agenda, I suppose, of the Waldorf school.